start the show, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Beef, the Beefmaster Education Endowment Fund. Thank you for everything you do for the cattle industry, this breed, and us. Thank you for supporting us. SEBA, the Southeastern Beefmaster Breeders Association. Thank you for all you're doing, especially for the Southeast, and look out for their sale every August in convention. Emmons Beefmasters, Mr. Steve and Miss Cindy needs no introduction. Thank you for what you do for the breed, and thank you for supporting us. C&M Ranches out of Kershaw, South Carolina, the Chick family. Thank you for what you all do for us. It means a lot. Lissy's Beefmasters down in Texas. Thank you to them for supporting the show. And look out for their sales, multiple sales a year, plus some frozen genetic sales. Cottage Farms Beefmasters. Thank you for supporting us, and thank you for what you do for the breed as well. Been in it 50 years, and that's saying something. Sea Shepherd Beefmasters down in Texas, thank you for supporting us. Jones Beefmasters over in Savannah, Tennessee, Mr. Clark Jones, look out for his sale every June. Has great cattle and breeds, just great stuff. Valor Cattle Company out of Georgia, thank you for supporting us, and we couldn't do it without any of you, and we really appreciate it. Welcome to Beefmaster Banner. We're your hosts, Josh Morrison and Jared Strickland, with Lance Bauer tonight. How you guys doing?
Doing pretty good. It's hot, like everywhere.
It's just starting to get warm. Summer's here.
Sorry, Dr. Lance Bauer. I always forget that. I try to keep that in there. It's hot and it's dry here. It's like 96 today, and it's not rained in I don't know, 30 days maybe. It's dry, it's brown, crunchy, and it's not good. So hopefully we'll get some rain here. How's the weather y'all's way?
We're getting dry here considering how wet it's been this spring. We're starting to turn a little bit.
We've started to dry up. I think this hurricane's about to hit us or hit Texas and maybe bring us a little bit of rain.
Oh yeah.
I was actually looking at that earlier this afternoon, and like it may be going to turn, and a lot of Texas may get quite a bit of rain out of it. I don't know.
I hope so.
That's still a Category 5 too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it'll make landfall as a Category 5, and then they say it's going to come across and strengthen again after it's gone across Yucatan.
Good grief. Well, all the folks in the path of that are sure in our prayers, because that's nothing fun to. A Category 1 or 2 is nothing fun. A 5 really could be detrimental. So, but tonight we're kind of continuing our EPD series. We've decided to go talk about birth weight, wean weight, and yearling weight. In our series of EPDs, we got really good reviews off of the very first one we did. People really seemed to like it. Got lots of comments saying that it really helped them a lot, and they were really looking forward to the rest of this series. So I'm looking forward to it too. But Lance, I guess let's just start, and we'll kind of ask this question at the beginning of every episode, just because it's different EPDs. But why do we measure growth EPDs?
The easiest reason, and this goes for weaning weight and yearling weight especially, is everything we do is based on pounds. We're in the pounds of beef business. So we've got to put pounds on the ground. So that's the real reason to measure those weight traits. Most cattle are sold at weaning weight. The majority in this country still go through an auction barn. However, there's plenty that go out at other times, but we do need those weaning weights and yearling weights because we're selling pounds of beef. And then birth weight, that's measured because I think every producer's least favorite thing to do is have to go pull a calf. I know I hate pulling calves, and birth weight is highly correlated with having to pull calves and calving ease. So that's why all those are measured, and they're very economically relevant traits.
How do those three kind of correlate to each other? I guess would be because they're kind of, it's a weight. So how's those correlate to each other?
Yeah, so those traits do correlate to each other fairly well. I mean, if you're gonna have a big weaning weight, you're typically gonna have a big yearling weight. Big our smaller calves with low birth weights typically don't grow as fast as those calves that are a little bit bigger at birth. You know, we do find some bulls that we consider curve benders. And it's, you know, the original talk about a curve bender was a low birth weight bull that's really high in his growth traits. And, you know, we do have those out there, low birth weight bulls that are high in their growth traits. And then, you know, there's kind of some talk about bending the curve on the other side, in terms of the sustainability and moving forward with more efficient cattle, bending that curve from weaning to yearling and kind of, you know, kicking it up and getting real big weaning weights and then slowing down after, you know, weaning to yearling, slowing it down a little bit and making a little bit more moderate cows and that kind of deal. But they are all correlated. So if you're selecting for, I mean, if you go in and you single trait select for low birth weight, you're going to select 99% of the time against your other growth traits.
That makes a lot of sense because it seemed like to me, just looking back in our cow herd, especially in the commercial cow herd, you know, you always got that cow that has a big calf, and seems like that calf was always at the top of the weaning pen too. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Well, and I think, I guess maybe a few things that stuck out to me there is, I think we've got to not go maybe to the extreme as far as birth weight, but I would like both of y'all's opinions. In my opinion, when we're looking at birth weight versus wean weight, I guess you could even go as far as yearling weight, which you get more feed and stuff in that. But you know, just like people want to make bulls, you know, heifers, to me, you can have a real small heifer and still have a pretty small wean weight, but still end up with a really good heifer at the end of it. Seems to me, just what I've seen in with our herd and things is, you really want to, you sort of want a birth weight that's not, I'm not saying 100-pound calf, but I mean, you want some substance to a bull calf to, if he's going to really make it, especially at all these feed tests, you know, just because that's all that these bull sales are anymore, feed tests. And if they're not rocking and rolling by the time you get there, chances are they're not going to do near as good as their competitors there in the feed yard. What's y'all's opinion there?
Well, I think birth weight, any trait, you know, there is an optimum. There's always an optimum, and an optimum is not a maximum. So, you know, there's optimum weaning weights. We may not need to select for the biggest weaning weight. Yeah, it's nice to see that animal that's in the top 10 or top 1% for weaning weight, top 1% for yearling weight. But if we're selecting for that, are we creating a huge animal that's going to go out and eat us out of house and home down the road? You know, with birth weight, if, like I said, if we select for tiny calves, are we selecting against animals that are going to grow at all? So I think that, you know, finding that optimum, finding that happy number, happy medium, you know, I always like to talk about, you know, don't try to be in the top 1% of the breed for all these traits, but, you know, maybe top 25 to 35% of the breed is kind of where I think the optimum is.
Yeah, you're definitely not hitting that extreme maybe on one end, and you're not at the bottom either. I like that, and I agree with you on especially on the sustainability part. You know, that's something that going forward we're going to have less land and less places to put these cattle, and they need to be able to sustain themselves without having to eat too much. So I think pushing that yearling weight can be detrimental, I guess, if it comes to mature cow weight and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, no, I agree 100%. The how and this is, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here, Lance, but if you can share, how highly heritable are these EPDs and these traits? I mean, I would assume they're pretty highly heritable, correct?
So these growth traits are moderately heritable traits, moderately to highly heritable traits. You know, so they're easier to select for, a lot easier to select for than your lowly heritable traits like fertility. But these are fairly heritable, so they're easy to select for, make progress within a generation. You know, your carcass traits tend to be a little bit more highly heritable, and I know we'll get into that, but you know, these are all easily selected on traits. And that's what I really like about, I think makes these simple traits is that they are just a weight. They're, you know, it's not a, you know, an interval between calves. It's not, it's something that's right there. It's on a scale, kind of a trait.
So when we're looking at the EPDs on paper and you're trying to select between two, uh, let's talk about that for a minute because when I first started, it was kind of hard for me to understand like what I was seeing different. But really, it's kind of a simple concept. Could you kind of explain, like, say if you're looking at two bulls with two, trying to decide you're selecting for weaning weight, let's say one's a plus 20 and one's a plus 25 or something. You know, what are you really looking at?
So what you're looking at there is an EPD, expected progeny difference, and so we're looking at the average of those two bulls' progeny. So you know, if you're looking at a 20 versus a 25, that bull with a 25 EPD is expected, on average, his calves are expected to be 5 pounds heavier at weaning than the one with a 20. Now, that's not to say that the one with a 20 is not going to have a calf that's heavier than the one that's 25 and vice versa. I mean, you know, but on average, and we see that, and I mean, we've done, I mean, there's been research done on it. You know, we had some cattle, those cattle that went to Noble. I looked at the weaning weights on them. They came from Noble. They were out of two Beefmaster bulls, and I looked at the weaning weights on them, and I think and it was a really small comparison, but I think the expected average was between, you know, I think it was about 10 pounds, and the actual was 14 pounds. So I mean, it's pretty good at predicting what's going on.
And I think that's a good way to look at it because, I mean, you know, like you said, you may have a one that does better, like a one that has a bigger calf, but like I said, over the average, over time, that's what to expect. And then you might could put that in the over times, you might be able to put that into dollars too, what you may want to spend more for that one or less or however.
Excuse me. And I think the other thing to remember on EPDs, and one of the biggest misconceptions that I run into in questions is, you know, if we go back to like that 25 EPD for weaning weight, somebody says, well, it's got 25 for weaning weight. You know, that means it's going to wean a 750-pound calf. Well, no, that's not what that means. You know, you can't tie an EPD to a specific weight, you know, and the biggest one is birth weight. Well, it's got negative birth weight, so it's going to have 60-pound calves. No, that doesn't mean that. You've got to use them as a comparison tool, either between, you know, several animals against the breed average, looking at percentile ranks and seeing utilizing them that way. They're a comparison tool, but you can't just say that, you know, a -1 is a 65-pound calf.
That's
Yeah, I agree.
that brings up a good point. You know, when you talk about contemporary groups or the one that may have ratioed well, let's say a 105 or something, still may have had an 80-pound birth weight, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
depending on which
Well,
herd
it's,
you're in and stuff like that.
And
well,
that's where contemporary groups come in. And I think we can do a whole talk on contemporary groups.
yeah, that may be one of the last ones we do just to kind of tie it all together. I feel like that would be kind of cool. That would probably be a good one to do. But, you know, and I think it's important for everybody to know just because you have a small calf that maybe didn't wean near as big as the other ones, but they're still good, don't write that calf off because they may have been born, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 pounds less than the other. But at weaning time, that could mean a whole lot of pounds.
Well,
And
you
I,
might be looking at you day per age of gain or something like that.
Right, right.
I think the thing to look at there, and I mean, that's the thing to look at with EPDs in general, and I may be jumping the gun here. That's the thing with any cattle selection tool that we have, whether it's, you know, our visual appraisal of them, whether it's EPDs, whether it's pedigree information. everything that we do is a tool. And we can't just rely on one tool. And I don't care what trade you're in. If you rely on one tool, I don't want it. If you're a cabinet maker and all you use is a hammer, I'd hate to see the cabinets because I don't know how you cut
Beat them in two.
them.
No, but it makes sense. Like you said, it's all relevant to each other. Every step of this is relevant to each other. If one thing doesn't add up, then that doesn't mean you just scrap the whole thing and start over. You may have a sufficient. I mean, I don't know how many cows I've seen that don't have good EPDs at all. I mean, terrible EPDs. And sometimes they turn out to be your best cows. How that is, I don't know, but it's pretty amazing how just because we're talking about EPDs, we're not, just like you said, it's a tool. But I have seen it that some people will go, man, these EPDs are terrible, but she's my best cow, and it happens.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, when I help my dad pick bulls for his cattle back home, my job is to look at the EPDs and, the last sale that we went to, the last bull that we bought, he was, he met my EPD requirements, but he was the lowest one out of all the bulls I picked, but he was the only one that didn't have another issue with him. And so, I use the EPDs as a tool to make and narrow down my selection decision, but they weren't the end all be all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to probably say this in every episode we do, especially as far as the EPD series goes. I think it's important to note the importance of recording all data, bad, good, mediocre, because if you don't put it all in and you just put the good data in, you might as well throw these EPD system out the window because it's never going to be accurate.
Well, and when we get to talking about contemporary groups, well, I'll talk about it, but if you only turn in your good data and you don't turn in your bad data, you're really punishing the good ones by not giving them the credit that they're due. If say you wean off calves from 450 to 650 and you say, I'm not going to register anything under 550, you go from taking a 200-pound difference in that contemporary group down to 100 pounds. And you're really just looking at the differences there. You're not looking at the entire group and giving full credit to those that you did register.
And I think that's really a good point, Lance. And it goes back to maybe what you're just talking about, Josh, with some of the cows that EPDs are maybe not as good or whatever. If you are doing that, like Lance said, if they're not getting the full credit, their EPDs are not going to move in the right direction that you would want them to either. Would that be a good assumption, Lance? Or
Excuse me, yes.
so that's like I said, always put your data in. That way you can show off the ones that are doing better. So if you do have, let's say, that best cow out there that doesn't have the good EPDs and she's, winning, having the best calves growth wise over time, her EPDs will move in the right direction if you're putting the right data in and comparing them to something else.
And that's another good point is those EPDs change as we bring in more data, because EPDs are based on pedigree, that animal's performance within its contemporary group, performance of anything that it's related to, its DNA. All of that goes into the calculation of EPDs as well as how its calves perform. So, as you get calves on the ground out of a new animal, out of a new bull, and his calves are really outperforming and outdoing, you'll see his EPDs increase, and you'll see the accuracy of the EPD increase as well.
And that kind of goes along with the DNA too.
Yes.
If you get the markers in those calves that have performed well, that, like you said, that EPD may be higher and more accurate before you even have some of the data, I guess.
Yeah. So those GE EPDs, with having that genomic data, you're giving them anywhere from 10 to 25 calves worth of data.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really good because then, like you said, it's going to get so much more consistent, and it's going to be a lot better. Kind of rolling in, that kind of rolls us into my next question is when selecting cattle, how should we look at EPDs? We obviously know that we need to just use it as a tool, but what advice would you have for folks that's maybe brand new? I guess these last two are kind of they're different questions, but they're kind of the same, I guess, at the same point. But as far as when you're selecting, maybe at a sale or something like that, what would you look at?
Well, I mean, when you're selecting at a sale, and it's like I said earlier, it's about an optimum. You know, and your optimum is going to be different depending on your operation. So you kind of need to know your operational goals. I mean, that'd be a whole nother series right there about talking about operational goals, you know, and setting those goals and where you want to go. You know, so if I'm out there as a commercial guy, I got just, you know, I'm looking for bulls. I'm gonna select and I'm gonna sell those calves at weaning. You know, I'm gonna select on weaning weight. I'm gonna go find me the best weaning weight bull that fits, you know, in terms of my other criteria and structure, all that. I'm gonna find the best weaning weight bull I can, put him out there with my cows and get bigger weaning weights. You know, I'm looking at a balanced approach. You know, I'm going to select for a moderate birth weight. I'm going to select for moderate weaning and moderate yearling weights. You know, kind of stay in that top 35% for all three of those and keep myself pretty balanced across the board. Know those cattle are going to perform and grow, but I'm not going to have some monstrous cattle, you know, out there. You know, I'm looking for that maternal kind of female. That may be where I go with that. So it's all, like I said, it's all based on your operational goals. And then as you get into, you know, some of the more advanced reproductive technologies like flushing cattle, we can look at a cow and, you know, okay, this is a dang good cow. I'm flushing her. I've been flushing her. Her calves always do well. I could stand a little more weaning weight in her. I could stand a little more yearling weight in her. You know, go find a bull that hits that criteria. You know, so as you get more selective on your breeding, you can kind of match make your cows and your bulls. And you can really select some AI sires based on their EPDs. Um, if you know your whole herd needs a shot of growth.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you breaking that down. One thing I struggle with is, like you mentioned, taking the moderate approach. I'm always wanting to push that weaning weight, yearling weight kind of deal, but at the same time, I don't want inefficient cows either. So that's tough. And I get a lot of, so I say some of the folks I talk to are kind of sometimes in the same boat, because I've noticed over time, you know, now that we've been doing it several years, some of my more moderate type wean weight cattle tend to breed back so much easier than the ones that push that weaning weight way up there. And it's hard to find that middle ground, especially I mean, you know, cattle is a long-term game, so it's tough. So I think looking at the moderation approach sometimes is, I think that's more direction we're going to head, just because of sustainability, getting those calves every year and things like that. Because I've had cows that'll really knock it out on a wean weight, but that ain't necessarily me. If I have a dry year, that don't mean she got bred, you know. So that's always something to think about.
Well, 2 points kind of that I've got out of this is I'm going to pull this one out of the archives. I think it was 3 years ago when I think one of the ones that Mr. Clark Jones come on, you know, he said we are so worried about extremes. We need to not worry about extremes, but building from the ground up. So the way that I gathered that was get rid of the bottom and just keep pushing forward. Don't be trying to get those extremes every single time, because it's never going to work. You're never going to get those outliers every time. It's just not going to happen. One other point that I had was another episode we did with Mr. Bruce Robbins. Was he was talking about we were on pedigrees and the importance of knowing the cow line, the bull line, the pedigrees. And it's funny how everything ties in together when we talk about this, because going back and knowing that line of cattle, it goes back to what I said earlier. They may not have the best EPDs, but you may know something about that line of cattle that nobody else does, that they do knock it out of the park, or vice versa. You still, you know, you kind of learn what to stay away from as far as maybe some matings or something you don't like. but it all ties in together, and it's pretty neat how it does.
I agree. And I think going back to the, you cull the bottom. I mean, you make sure you get rid of your bottom, keep that optimum. It's human nature. I mean, if I go out there and I see something with a 60 versus a 40, I'm like, oh, the 60 is better. When in reality, the 40 may be the better fit for what my production goals are.
Yeah, I mean that's a good thing. Look at especially when you talk about these growth EPDs, and maybe Lance, you can chime in on it too. But I mean, look at your operation. How well can you feed those cattle? I mean, what's your stocking rate and things like that? Because high growth usually means high nutrition requirements as well. So that's something I've had to struggle with and learn that, some years are better than others, but also I have to understand I have limitations of how much I can feed, how good of the quality hay I'm going to have. And that really dictates how far I'm going to push some of that too. So I think that's one place to start. What you've mentioned that is look at where your operation is, where can you go, and where you need to be.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the whole thing is like I've said, it's a tool and it has to fit with your goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going into the last question that we have for this part of the series is, and you kind of mentioned it in the last question, but what's one piece of advice someone brand new getting into the cattle business, whether they're commercial or whatever, what's a piece of advice you'd give them as far as these EPDs go?
I think this is this is advice for anything, and I think I touched on it, and I've said several things about tools, but the biggest thing is operational goals. Learn how these EPDs are going to fit into your operational goals. Growth EPDs, like we touched on in the very beginning, are extremely important because what we do is we sell pounds of beef. As we get to talking about carcass stuff later, we'll talk about the importance of that. But the whole thing is we sell pounds of beef. So when looking at these, know what your goal is, and if you're selling weaned calves, I want big weaning weights because I'm selling pounds of calf right there across the scale.
Yeah, it's really good advice. I need to take that advice myself. So,
Well, man, you like Lance said, you're selling no matter what we're doing in the end game, we're selling pounds. Weaning yearling, I mean, you're selling them as baby calves, like straight off the cow, or you're back down on them, you're still selling. And then when you finish them out, you're still selling pounds. That's what it's all about. I mean, there's other things that go into it when you go to the finished stage and all that, but still, there's still pounds. You're paid by the pound. So,
regardless of where you buy it, that's still what you're paid by at the end of the day. I mean, we always talk about end market. That's our end market. That's everybody in the cow business. I don't care what you're doing. That's your end market. And you have to, like you said, you have to sell those pounds of beef and you have to get as much as you can for it.
now if you go like this last week at Clarksville, you paid a pretty good price per pound for those. But they'll produce a lot of beef in the future too. You got to think about that.
They will. And hopefully there's a lot of good calves that come out of those and they can sell lots of pounds of beef.
That's right. Will you think about that though? Those genetics may think about how many pounds of beef that those genetics will affect over the next decade,
Oh, absolutely.
Kind of a
and how many they have over the last 20, at least 24 years of that sale.
Yeah, that's right.
Pretty impressive. But well, that's about all we've got for this part of the series. That was a good episode. I think people get a lot out of that one. I know I did. It's pretty interesting to listen to the different point of views as far as EPDs go. And on this next episode, on the next episode, we're gonna talk carcass traits. So that one might run a little longer because there's more carcass traits than people might think. So we're gonna dive into it. But guys, I appreciate coming on. Lance, we appreciate it. And we'll see everybody on the next episode.
See
ya. Thank y'all.
Well, we want to thank everybody for listening to the Beefmaster Banner podcast. Please know that we are on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and we are on YouTube. Just search Beefmaster Banner. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. We love hearing from you, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.